for this discussion, Dr. Kamaljeet Singh Anand, Sir Roopinder Singh, Ms. Sonia Dhami, and my colleague Dr. Roopinder Singh and Dr. Madhuri Chawla. I feel honored in welcoming you and those who have joined us online from different parts of India and abroad. You know about Bhai Veer Singh Sadan and its institute functioning under the guidance of Dr. Manmohan Singh, who have been organizing functions, major international seminars to celebrate the centuries of the Gurus. And every month we have two functions, one lecture, one discussion on a good book. We're fortunate for this month who got a book. We're talking about a man who was larger than life, our friend Dr. N.S. Kapany, the man who bent light. Now I'm reminded of a line from M.A. McAuliffe's 6-volume History of the Sikhs. He says, within quote, I bring from the East what is practically an unknown religion, unquote. While Sikhs are no longer unknown, they are everywhere in all parts of the world. To my mind, they still remain victim of some bias, some misunderstanding, as was evident because of attacks or mistaken identity after 9/11. Dr. Kapany understood this message very well, and apart from his professional skill, he devoted time and energy in setting up institutions to promote Sikh studies. I remember in North America, the very first Sikh Studies Conference was organized by Dr. Kapany and our good friend Mark Zuckermeyer in 1976. Thereon, Kapany Chair of Sikh Studies in Santa Barbara. Not only this, more and more chairs were established. And then we attended a conference in Toronto University. There was a post-conference in, again, Berkeley. I had the fortunate of having many meetings with Dr. Kapany and enjoying his hospitality, the last being the 50 years of the Sikh Foundation, when a volume was released, and I met Dr. Anand also there. Dr. Kapany had a great regard for Bhai Veer Singh. I remember during one of the meetings, he says, do you know, I started a magazine as a college student. Deepak was the name of the magazine. Went to Bhai Veer Singh in Dehradun, sought his advice. Bhai Sahib not only gave me blessing, but also wrote for my magazine. And he says, I gave the first copy to Bhai Sahib. That regard he had. So I think it is incumbent for us that we remember that man who has got fame because of his inventions, because of his technology, because of his making many patents, but also because of his solid contribution to Sikh studies. I think I should stop because I'm trespassing into the area which is reserved for the panelists and our moderator, Dr. Chawla. Over to Dr. Chawla.
Thank you, Professor Mahendra Singh ji. And all thanks to one of the most brilliant minds of our time, who was hailed by the Fortune magazine in 1999 as one of the 7 unsung heroes of the 20th century, whom the world knows as the man who bent light. Thanks to him that we convene today online from various parts of the globe. The man born in Moga and who, as it is said, set out to conquer the world. But I would say was actually the one instrumental in bringing the globe together, in making it a one big family. A scientist, an inventor, an entrepreneur, an academician, a farmer, an artist, a philanthrope, an avid art collector. He reminds me of Tagore and more, I would say. Padma Vibhushan Dr. Narinder Singh Kapany is beyond doubt one of the most inspiring personalities I have known. It is indeed a proud moment for me and an absolute honor to moderate this discussion session on his book, on his memoir, and equally also to be doing it for such an esteemed panel. And on behalf of National Institute of Punjab Studies, Bhai Veer Singh Sahitya Sadan, as well as on my personal behalf, I extend a very warm welcome to the three esteemed panelists for the day, Dr. Kamaljeet J.S. Anand and Sardar Roopinder Singh ji and Ms. Sonia Dhami. As also to Professor Ravel Singh, convener of Punjabi Advisory Board Sahitya Academy, who is a constant support in all our programs. A very good morning to the Indian audience and good evening to those who have logged in from the US and other parts of the West. The book for discussion today, The Man Who Bent Light. This, I think, Ms. Dhami has it just right behind her. I have it here in my hand. It was a full 1 year's labor of love of the father of fiber optics, Dr. Kapany, who worked in close deliberation with Tom Parker, as he says in his acknowledgements, who recorded his experiences, and Ms. Sonia Dhami, who selected the images and was closely involved in the making of the memoir. The book was completed in March 2020, but unfortunately, Dr. Kapany was not around to see his memoir hit the stands as he left for his heavenly abode the same year at the age of 94. It got published in 2021 by Rowley Books in collaboration with the Sikh Foundation. And given Dr. Kapany's futuristic vision, the book has been rightly dedicated to the youth everywhere. The memoir is a vivid account of a brilliant and humble visionary who challenged conventional science and he bent light to change the world. Lucidly written, it is what the jacket of the book claims, an insightful and inspirational life story, as it chronicles the 90 remarkable years of Dr. Kapany's life, beginning with his childhood days in the ancestral home in Moga around 1930. The book highlights his entire life, and we embark on the journey of his life along with him through his school days, the pranks that he played, his visits to Patiala. That was, I found it I was very happy when I read that, with his cousins. The gift of the camera, which played an extremely vital role in his life. The move from Agra to London as he pushed the limits of science, as he questioned the concept that light travels only in a straight line, and as he forged ahead to invent in 1953 what we all know today as fiber optics, a term that he coined. He went on to blaze the trail for future innovators, and they used his invention to further transform the world. And though he strongly wished to come back to India, but destiny had something else in store for him, and the book unfolds how he got relocated in the USA. The narrative then engages the reader as it foregrounds Dr. Kapany's joie de vivre, which enabled him to embrace and accept life, accept whatever life came up with, as he went along with the flow, though it took him away from what was always the plan. That was his plan. So the man with the belief that given the opportunity and the resources and curiosity, individuals were infinitely capable of wonderful achievements and desiring a rich, multifaceted life for himself, like Leonardo da Vinci, as he says in the book. He went on to excel in various fields, from entrepreneurship to academics, as he taught in Berkeley, Stanford, Massachusetts, to farming, to art, sculpture, to the establishment of the Sikh Foundation as he championed Sikh culture and heritage. And he indeed did live I would say, quote unquote, a Da Vincian lifestyle, tasting, as he says, a little bit of this, a little bit of that from the vast savory buffet that the life had. The memoir traces how he went on to become one of the most influential innovators ever. His research, his inventions, which spread across fiber optics communication, lasers, medical instrumentation, etc. And he drew attention as one of the first Indians in America to take any company public. And he actually deserved the Nobel with over 100 patents to his name. The book, penned in the form of short, pithy, crisp chapters, is hard to put down. It's a very racy read that way, and it closes with an appeal in the true spirit of Sikhism to the youth to work towards absolute equality for all, promoting love and charity. This I quote from the last page of the book, actually. An engineer par excellence, an innovator, Dr. Kapany has left an indelible impact on the lives of innumerable people across the globe. And I'm sure that this book will help numerous others. For, he is actually one of the unsung heroes. So it must, I think this book would take his name, his fame further. It would help numerous others to know what a wonderful innovator and achiever he was. And though I'm too overwhelmed by the book, which it has actually introduced me to this achiever, I am duty bound and also myself eager to, like I think the audience as well, to listen to the more capable experts we have with us today. And our first speaker for the day is Sardar Roopinder Singh ji, an author and a senior journalist. Roopinder Singh ji specializes in Sikh history and culture, information technology and education. He graduated from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and procured his master's degree in philosophy from Delhi University. He began his career in journalism as assistant editor, Indian Observer, New York, and retired as senior associate editor of the Tribune, Chandigarh, after having worked for the paper for about 30 years. During his stint with the Tribune, besides other responsibilities, he launched the internet edition in 1998 and managed the book review section from 2002 to 2020. Roopinder Singh ji is the author, is also an author, and he has authored 5 major books, 4 in English and 1 in Hindi. That's amazing, sir. And this includes a critically acclaimed volume on the founder of Sikh religion, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, and a volume on Sikh heritage. On behalf of the Sadan, I once again welcome you, sir, and request you to throw light on your impressions of the book. Also talk to us about your experiences as a journalist. And the stage is all yours, sir. I have this very unfortunate duty of reminding about the paucity of time, so we need to stick to a 20-minute time frame. So I would request you to comprehend within that. The mic is all yours now, sir.
Dr. Chawla, thank you for this introduction, which kind of places me on a pedestal where it gets more and more difficult to deliver. But anyway, basically, I want to take you back to a journey which you read about in the book. 2 young lads going on a cart, slipping down as they go to the mother's village. And the cart is going through the ruts, and believe me, those ruts can be really deep. I've actually traveled on a bullock cart to go to my village once, and I know how difficult it was. And these youngsters sleep. lulled by the gentle sway of the whole machine. And remember, these are carts with no suspension, nothing. I mean, only a carefree child can sleep in that atmosphere. I take this as a vignette, one of the many, which I will take you through as we talk about Dr. Kapany. I think you've beautifully sketched out the various milestones of his life in your introduction, and I see no reason to repeat that. Now we need to fill in the sketch. And to me, it's these vignettes that, when woven together, provide a kind of a gestaltic view of the person, as a whole that's much more than the sum of these parts. Now look at it. This journey immediately reminded me of a picture I had seen of first ISRO rocket components also going on a cart to be assembled and then hurled into space. And this cart journey was a youngster who was being shaped to shape the world. We also notice right in the initial stage the tremendous influences of Sikhism in him. Listening to Janam Sakhis, and also the little to and fro that happens between his mother and father about how reason fighting against belief, and imbibing what was in them. Then he goes to the Golden Temple and he records his visits and his impressions. This is in 1933. And I think it's the strong value system of Sikh values that was within the house that shaped his mindset. I mean, he was no saint. He was a regular child. You talked about Patiala, that's where he goes. He goes to steal some fruit from the Maharaja's orchard. I mean, what are Maharajas for if you can't steal fruit from their orchards? Then after that, he looks at the carriage and sees the Maharaja himself. And who does he see? The grandest of them, Maharaja Roopinder Singh. And a 10-carriage way going, sees that, it leaves an impression on him. The grandeur of a Sikh royal is also a part of it. This is when he also understands a little bit, I'm sure, of what goes on when he stays with the Justice Nagina Singh. And here's a guy who was a pleader and then becomes a judge and also writes a very important book on confessions, which was, I think, published in 1916. Now, all this shapes up a person, but Patiala is a very small part of his life because basically he spends much of his life in India in Dehradun. And that's where he goes to school. He's an indifferent student. He's not something who's, pushing boundaries at all. He plays around. He does the things that normal children do. Partition comes. And that's traumatic for him. Why? One, his staff is threatened and he feels very protective towards them, and he's the only sahab in the house. The rest of them are knockers. Therefore, it's his responsibility. And then he sees those 15 schoolgirls, he counted, lying, slaughtered. That has an impact on a very tender mind. Never leaves him. He joins his father, tries to help him out in various business ventures, and manages to double the outcome. Now that's something. Double the outcome by simply observing that, the trucks they were handling were going empty, coming back empty, and arranging for something to come back in them. basic, but terribly important if we haven't done it. The impact of the partition can also be seen in the Sikh Students' Literary Society article that he writes, in which he says that atrocities committed in the name of religion are the best armor in the world and the worst cloak. Telling for a young mind to delineate something so well. But then what happens? His mind gets ignited because of his teacher's comment that light travels in straight lines, and he starts working towards it. He builds himself up and he becomes a better student. Also, I think one thing we have to recognize in his life is that he had a knack of finding the right mentors and sticking by them. Whether it's in school, whether it's in the ordnance factory, which he joins later, he finds the right people who mentor him. Of course, he works hard, but those mentors play a significant role in him. And in fact, it is his ordnance factory work, where he works with his hands in various places, that holds him in good stead and saves him from being an egghead, from being only an intellectual, somebody who can work with his hands and from being a theoretician, find practical applications for what he has theorized. Thereby demonstrating, for example, later, fiber optic. Now, in England, his Imperial College sojourn is something which is quite interesting. And the college and the environment proves to be a fertile ground for a young Narinder. He graduates, earns his PhD there, and if you look at City of Lights, which is a book on fiber optics, you see that the guy says that he was the lead author or co-author of 56 scientific papers, an astounding 30% of all the research published in the field during that decade. He wrote the first book on fiber optics, and in 1960, a cover story article he wrote for Scientific American, where he used the term first time visibly. London's also where he falls in love. And that's a cute story. I mean, the guy can't dance for nuts, but when the lady he's besotten by asks him, he says, of course I can dance. And we all do that, don't we? Now, he married her at Shepherd Bush Gurdwara. Again, the Patiala connection comes through because Shepherd Bush benefited tremendously from the funds provided by Maharaja Roopinder Singh in the initial years. So again, you have that little connect there. And his PhD then sort of pushes him on to the international stage, and that's where he goes to Florence. He loses his car and lands up in America. Rochester welcomes him, gives him a nice place to raise his son, Raj, who was born there, and also provides him with an environment that nurtures him and nurtures his family. And I have to say that his wife plays a tremendous role in building him up, in making sure that he stays ahead of the curve socially and otherwise. Now, here's a guy who's a scientist, but he was a very socially apt person. And the kind of general impression we have of a scientist is of somebody who's not so. Well, he proved them wrong, didn't he? Now, from there, he goes to Chicago, and that's where he becomes the inventing machine. The environment in Chicago, where he's supervising a lot of people, 30 scientists or so, is also where they reward people for inventing things. And in a new field, they made sure that they were well rewarded. And, as he says in the book, As an extra incentive, the institute offered everyone in department cash bonuses every month that he or she came up with an invention. With fiber optics still so new, everyone was inventing things willy-nilly, from ways to improve overall fiber quality to magnifying or minifying fibers. We got to a point for me that the notable months were the ones when I didn't score a bonus. In relatively short order, I'd become an inventing machine. Now, this is when he again, he in Rochester, before he goes to Rochester, he said, I want to go to India, but he's persuaded to go to Rochester. In Chicago, it becomes a little more pronounced because he's invited to New York by Maharaja Yadvinder Singh to meet Krishna Menon. Now, that meeting takes him, eventually brings him to India, where he meets the Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and also Homi Bhabha, the head of the Atomic Energy Commission. And they addressed the Defense Services Conference, almost decided that he would become Krishna Menon's scientific advisor. But by the time this decision has happened, till the time the UPSC sends an offer letter to him, he's waited too long. The glacial bureaucracy has failed yet again to get a bright mind, and he's in Palo Alto as an entrepreneur. Now, people who warned him about it were right. The speed at which he was moving would not have worked out in this environment. Now, in Palo Alto, we have this lovely picture of him getting the key to the city. I mean, as a business person, the kind of deals he made, the kind of research he did, which I'm sure Dr. Anand will educate us more about, and I will not go into that. But all in all, they leave you full of admiration, especially his account of how he manages things. So the scientist in him is one thing, the manager in him is another, the entrepreneur another. And this is a nice combination of these values, which really is something phenomenal. At the same time, there's his love for Sikhism, the Sikh Foundation, which Sonia ji is going to be telling us about, and his interest in arts. Started very early. He was very impressed with the Janam Sakhis, and they became the core of his collection, the physical Janam Sakhis that were, from Patna Sahib, one of the ancestors there. And the illumination on those Janam Sakhis helped weave better the picture of what was happening. And I'm sure even I've seen illuminated Janam Sakhis as a child, you somehow also see them more, they become more real with the pictures. And then from there, he went on to become a collector. And boy, what a collector. I mean, there's Rani Jinda, which he was very proud of, is a magnificent painting of an individual who, again, is unsung, unfortunately. What a woman, and what a person who valued her so much. Then, of course, I was a bit, sad that he didn't, he says that he didn't get any thing by Amrita Pritam. Now, well, in Chandigarh, we had people who have them. And therefore, the thought came to our mind that, oh my God, if only we had known he was so interested, something might have worked out. But, well, in life, there are some things you get and some things you don't. And you learn to live with that. Now, while he was collecting art, he was also making art. But again, like the polymath he was, combining fiber optics and producing artistic sculptures. And I mean, I found it fascinating that, the person who sort of discovers him and showcases his art eventually is none other than, Frank Oppenheimer, who was the brother of the man who made the nuclear bomb. Wow. I mean, look at it. Here's an art person, and that guy blows up the world, and this guy preserves the world. Boom. Wonderful. When I was in America, I was in close touch with Dr. Inderjeet Singh, IJ Singh in New York. And I still remember one of the talks we had chatting away, he said, Narinder Kapany is one of those people you can send to meet a president and be proud as a Sikh. You know that he will acquit himself well. Well, he knew a lot of presidents. He interacted with them. And at one point, there was also talk of his being explored for the possibility of coming in as second in command to an incoming US ambassador, Daniel Moynihan. Now, a guy who was quoted by both governments at various levels, but didn't join any. Interesting. He gave back to academics also. I mean, academics gave him the foundation of what was to be his later life, and he gave back to academics by teaching, by creating new programs, and eventually funding chairs. I mean, endowed chairs, Narinder Singh Kapany chair in optoelectronics, and then the Narinder Kapany professor in entrepreneurship, all of them
20.
speak to his love for the field he was in. But then, of course, for the Sikhs, it is the Kundan Kaur Kapany chair of Sikh and Punjab studies at UC Berkeley. No, UC Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara. That really, helped to launch the field of Sikh studies in a much more meaningful manner. Also, what is less documented is the support for various other chairs and his help in helping people who wanted to set up chairs in various other academic institutions. I also was, you mentioned farmer. I was also quite impressed by the fact that he wanted to own some land. And he was not a man to sort of deal in small measures. So he goes and purchases 3,000 acres of old wine grapes in Central Valley near Fresno with a few partners. But yes, and again, serendipity. I mean, here's a guy who goes on a flight to look at the land, flies over a wrong field, likes it and buys something else. And that also turns productive. I mean, that's a Midas touch if there's any. What a man. But yes, then, he also knew how to leverage it, and the mineral rights to that provided them with royalty for many, many years. But for us as a community, the Sikh Foundation is a major creation of his, something that we can all look at as an institution that will build on the legacy of Dr. Kapany. I have seen copies of the Sikh Sansar over the years, and it was a nice quarterly magazine, but then again, like everything else, after 1984, they became much more active and brought out full-page ads about the assault on the Golden Temple, as well as the position of the Sikhs, and tried to educate Americans, which naturally irritated the Indian government. So much so that one of his major regrets is the fact that he could not attend his mother's funeral because he couldn't get permission. The government can be quite terrible about these things. Yeah. But the foundation has done stellar work, which I'm sure Sonia ji will inform us more about. And I mean, the exhibitions, the literature they've produced, the lecture series they've done, the chairs they've endowed, and in building an institution that will outlast the individual, he has done something which, as a community, we don't do often. How many more minutes do I have? Am I near there or no? Okay. Just a few notes more. We must commend Dr. Kapany for what he was for the community, for our people, for his own family. Two very fine individuals who are achievers in their own right, really are another blessing to the world. And also, I mean, I must say, the devoted care he gave to his wife when she needed him, the various glimpses of the family man that really touch one and humanize him. He was an icon, certainly he was. He was also a person who did good for the people he wanted to do good for. And for that, I salute him. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madhuri ji, you're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, I did unmute. I don't know what happened. Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for a very informed and well articulated address. And you beautifully wove together several vignettes from his life, almost covering right from childhood, from that cart journey till towards the end when he could not visit India. And you have pointed out several important facets of his life. But one important thing that I would like to share again, say that impressed me was that he did have a knack of finding the right mentors. And several times, in fact, 2 chapters are named like that. They came from the back of the room, as the book goes on to say. So he did not, it wasn't just the front benchers that impressed him. He could locate the correct person at the back of the room as well. And of course, his wife's role in keeping him ahead of the curve, and his own affection, sensitivity, and the camaraderie that they shared together is indeed remarkable. You also talked about Jindan Kaur, so I just would like to mention that we did have a discussion earlier on a book, Royals and Rebels, Rise and Fall of the Sikh Empire. So there, of course, Jindan Kaur has been dealt with in detail. And in fact, Chitra Banerjee Diva Karuni has also come up with a book on her. So it is, I think, of late, she has attracted attention, and I hope more scholars go into read about her. On that note, thank you so much, sir. And I think in future, we would get to hear more from you as well. Thank you so much. And our next speaker for the day is Dr. Kamaljeet J.S. Anand, a medical graduate from MGM Medical College, Indore. Dr. Anand acquired higher degrees from Oxford and Harvard, and also received specialized training at Boston's Children's Hospital and Massachusetts General Hospital in order to become a coveted name in the field of pediatric healthcare and healing. Currently a professor of pediatrics, anesthesiology, perioperative and pain medicine at Stanford University School of Medicine. He also directs the Pain Stress Neurobiology Lab. and serves on the Governing Council for Pain in Children at IASP. During his illustrious career, Dr. Anand has been conferred upon numerous prestigious awards, including the Nightingale Excellence Award for Physicians and the Dr. Martin Luther King Salute to Greatness Individual Award. A leading authority on pain and stress in newborn babies and management of pain in infants and children, Dr. Anand has established himself as a respected academician too. What will make any author, any scholar envy him is that Dr. Anand has published over 250 peer-reviewed articles. He has edited 7 books and journal issues, and he has contributed over 60 chapters in reputed books. Sir, again, the unpleasant task of the 20 minutes time frame, but on another occasion, maybe we'll hear you longer, but as of now, the mic is all yours, and we would love to hear you on the subject and your experiences as a medical practitioner as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chawla, for that very kind introduction. And Dr. Roopinder Singh ji, thank you for laying the groundwork. What a great man, a great achiever, a great visionary, but also a tremendously generous person. When I had heard about him, of course, and when I met him for the first time, he reminded me of brother of my grandfather, Dr. Santokh Singh Anand, who was the founder director of PGI. And just that hearty laugh and open personality, it was amazing to meet Dr. Kapany. And immediately within the first 5 minutes of meeting with him, I was ready to join his fan club, literally. And as time went along, I learned more and more of his great multifaceted personality. But you've touched, Dr. Roopinder Singh has touched on this very beautifully. I want to sort of share my minuscule understanding of his discoveries, the importance of his discoveries. Like it has been said before, the world is the way it is now because of Dr. Kapany's efforts, because of his intellect. And like Albert Einstein, he was a late bloomer. He muddled his way through school and through college, and literally just woke up when the professor said light only travels in straight lines. It was almost as if an unseen force had opened up this channel, which he took, and he picked up this line with great enthusiasm and laser-like focus, and truly made the seminal, pivotal discoveries related to this entire field of fiber optics. In the book, he talks about how he literally, with his own hands, built this lab at Imperial College London, making sort of 2 sides of the walls and a door and literally a lid on top of this area where he could have complete darkness, and in order to start his experimentation. And of course, his frustrations with the Pilkington glass factory, when he goes to them with optical quality glass, gives them the glass to make the fibers, and they just send him fibers made out of beer bottles. So his frustration, but imagine the perseverance, the doggedness of this scientist who says light can travel in, across sort of in curved spaces and so on through these fibers. And he goes on and on and on, chopping those glass fibers until he can show that light is actually traveling through not a straight line through a bent, surface. So amazing perseverance, doggedness, simply would not give up the gauntlet. He had picked it up and he had said, I am going to, show that light can actually do that. What an amazing, and it was almost as if from the time he woke up in the final year of his junior college or undergraduate days, to the ordnance factory, to the chance for a master's in Imperial College, to his job in Edinburgh. What amazing, it was as if an unseen force was simply directing his path so that he could gather all the skills he needed in order to be not only a theorist, but also a practical inventor, to not only find the underlying basic science principles of optics and optic transmission, to actually using those theoretical principles to develop things that could be of benefit to humankind. And one of his his very first paper was published in Nature in 1954, where he had coined the term fiber optics. And the full impact of his discoveries, has still not been manifested. This is now 80 years since he, or 70 plus years since he, made these initial discoveries. And we are still finding newer and newer applications of the original principles. So what are, for a non-scientific audience, what are those principles? And some of those he has described in his seminal paper in the Scientific American in 1960. But basically, the first principle that he found was that you could generate what's called total internal reflection by increasing the angle of the incident light rays between the incident light rays and the perpendicular. So light which ricochets off the edges of the walls of a fiber, it's called total internal reflection. And then he not only used this, but he measured minuscule changes in the refractive index of liquids by developing a completely new field of physics, which is called photorefractometry. And he used this to measure various things, things that are changing. For example, in a nuclear reactor, he could show exactly what is happening. Then he hit upon this idea of optical insulation, where you can take an optical glass fiber and coat it with glass of a lower refractive index. So this made the leakage of light across different fibers almost go away from, the incident light was getting lost at the rate of like 10 to 15, 16%. And he almost made that disappear overnight. But that was not it. So that was, an amazing discovery of its own. But then the big discovery happened in 1959, where he developed these sub-micron fibers, like tiny fibers which are packed into micron-sized fibers and are similar. So that achieved much higher resolution of the optical images and things like that. He used this for various endoscopes. His initial invention was called the fiberscope. And since then, that has been used in multiple applications in defense, in industry, in medicine, in many other things. And then while he had started his company, Optical Technologies, he then developed in vivo imaging and intravital microscopy. So for the first time, scientists like me, this was in 1961, we could actually study the tissues and the cells within living organisms, which had never been, you had to kill an organism, you had to kill a rat or a frog or a whatever experimental design you were working on, but here was in vivo imaging with intravital microscopy. So for the first time, opening up vistas that had been hidden for biomedical sciences since since the days of Vesalius from Milan and Warsaw in Italy. So anyway, moving on, he then used optical energy to ablate and injure tissues without causing any blood loss. This immediately got applied to laser photocoagulation of retinal detachment. And do you know, the very first patient to be, as he narrates in this book, is amazingly, the very first person to be, used with this, operated upon with this technique, was also an engineer and a research scientist who was himself using laser technology for his own research. And he had, suffered an injury which caused a retinal detachment. And the very second patient, this was at Stanford University Hospital, the very second patient was none other than the venerable Bob Hope himself. And so quite an amazing character of how, like you mentioned, the brother of Frank Oppenheimer at one end and Bob Hope on the other end, what great personalities he had been able to interact with and who benefited from his. And then lastly, but not least, very important to me as an ICU physician, the in vivo oximetry to measure oxygen saturations. As an ICU physician, I rely on this every minute of every day, because without that pulse oximeter, we wouldn't know how to manage respiratory illnesses in children or adults or any other patients. So it is amazing that this array of basic science principles, each of which spawned new and newer subfields in the area of optics, were being created through his discoveries. And like you had mentioned, indeed a travesty that Dr. Charles Kao, he got the Nobel Prize for physics for the discovery of fiber optics in 2009. But if you look at Dr. Charles Kao's career, he first started working on fiber optics at the Standard Telecom Labs in Harrow in UK in 1963. By then, Dr. Kapany had already published 32 original papers describing all the pivotal energies in fiber optics. It's really a travesty. I feel it's a huge travesty. It's the practice of the white man favoring the white man to maintain white supremacy. That's it. There is no other. Yes, I think there was some politics also. Ultimately, he did not part well with his first mentor, Professor Hopkins at Imperial College, who politically he was a communist, but he had a fight with his own student who did all the original discoveries, who made all the things just under his tutelage or under his umbrella. He made all the discoveries, yet Dr. Hopkins wanted all the patent rights for the UK, Europe, and USA, whereas he said, you can take the patent rights in India. What pettiness. I think only the British are capable of such pettiness, if I may reveal some bias. And how would, I'm also a mentor for various young people. Why would I want to take the credit for someone who's done work under my? In fact, this, if you allow me to share, I will share this letter. So can you see this letter?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is from Professor Charles Cow. It was dated 19th July 2001. This was 8 years before Dr. Cow was given the Nobel Prize in physics. And here he is supporting the nomination of Dr. Narinder S. Kapany for the John Tyndall Award of the IEEE. This is the International Association for engineers and entrepreneurs and electronics and so on. And he says very clearly, Dr. Kapany is a major contributor to the invention of the cladded optical fiber, which is for which Dr. Cow got the Nobel Prize. It's really a travesty, and he goes on to talk about Dr. Kapany's many applications and many other achievements in this letter. So it really is a kind of the prejudice, I think, for whatever reason that Sikhs have not received their due because they look different, they sound different, they are, they have a unique appearance, which is enormous gift to us by our 10th Guru. Realizing this, the very first year when I was asked to join the nominating committee for the Nobel Prize in Medicine, I decided Dr. Kapany, even though he was not given the Nobel Prize in Physics, should be nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology. And I wrote to the Nobel Committee, and we submitted a formal nomination where I talked about the principles of endoscopy that have revolutionized the fields of gastroenterology, pulmonology, urology, general surgery, neurosurgery, ophthalmology, et cetera, many other, as well as physiology and biomedicine. I talked about the principles of photorefractometry and absorption photorefractometry, spectrophotometry, and other applications, both in the ultraviolet, visible, and infrared regions of the light, that have revolutionized biochemistry, pharmacology, and clinical lab medicine, molecular biology, etc. Then I talked about the high resolution imaging from submicron fiber optics and high-speed image synthesizers that Dr. Kapany had invented, which have transformed the fields of radiology, cardiology, neurology, neurosurgery, neuroimaging, radiation therapy, etc. And then the diffraction absorptiometry, which has been applied to X-ray crystallography and other techniques that have made innumerable discoveries in biochemistry, structural biology, microbiology, genetics, and so on. And then the in vivo photocoagulation, in the fields of retinal surgery and ophthalmology. But not only that, this has been applied for cardiac electrophysiology. If you have a heart arrhythmia, the coagulation that is done of those accessory bundles, conduction bundles in your heart, is through using that same laser that Dr. Kapany created. Minimally invasive surgery, other surgical specialties. And then the in vivo oximetry and densitometry, which have helped ICU and all the other interventional physiology fields of medicine. So this nomination was sent in, we got supporting letters, we turned everything in. Unfortunately, he was not selected for the Nobel Prize, either in 2019 or in 2020. I feel that this was a huge loss for our community, but not only just our community, for the entire field of science, because here was a man intensely gifted, intensely focused, and always driven by the magnanimity of his heart for the common good, for bringing, improving upon the lives of other humans. and for that, he will forever be immortal in the fields of science and technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. First of all, for throwing light and enumerating the various applications, many, many more than actually the book tells us about, of his inventions, the innovations, and in layman's terms, explaining it to us as well, that what the principle on which it works. And you also talked about the oximeter, which of course the COVID has made us all aware of, which earlier probably we wouldn't have known also. And your personal interaction also you shared with us, and you said that he had this very hearty laugh, and which actually I think it comes through from the images in the book as well. There is a very positive aura about him. And indeed, I would say that he was actually a very generous and magnanimous person, because I saw some of his interviews on the YouTube, and there is no negativity. One of the journalists actually questioned him about his not being conferred with the Nobel, but there was not an iota of negativity or bitterness that one could discern. He was indeed a very generous, magnanimous, and a positive person. And on that note, thank you so much, sir, again, for sharing so much with us today. And our next speaker, we are fortunate we have Ms. Sonia Dhami with us today. And Ms. Dhami is a trustee of one of the oldest Sikh organizations in the USA, the Sikh Foundation. And she's also an author, a writer for Inca News on contemporary cultural issues, a collector of contemporary Sikh art, and an organizer of exhibitions, lectures, and seminars on contemporary Sikh art and cultural issues. Ms. Dhami is the president and CEO of Art and Tolerance, a non-profit organization with the mission to increase tolerance in humanity through arts. As the executive director of the Sikh Foundation, she had organized first contemporary Sikh art museum exhibit in the US, Expressions of Divinity, showcased as the Triton Museum in Santa Clara, CA in 2019. She has co-edited the book Sikh Art from the Kapany collection, as well as a bilingual book in Punjabi and English, Games We Play. She was closely associated with Dr. Kapany in the making of his memoir, selecting images, consistently reviewing the relevance of the topics, and also she overviewed its publication, as the acknowledgement also tells us. So I request you, Ms. Dhami, to please take over, and of course the 20 minutes time frame continues with us.
Thank you, Dr. Chawla, for the very kind introduction.
The mic is yours, ma'am.
Thank you also to Dr. Roopinder Singh for the invitation from Bhai Singh Sadan, and the distinguished speakers before me, Mr. Roopinder Singh and Dr. Anand. So I would try to build up the story of this
ma'am.
man.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you increase your volume a bit? I think I am not able to hear.
Okay, I think maybe I'll move a little closer. Let's try. Is this better?
This is better. Yeah, this is fine.
Okay, good. So I try to build up on the story of this great man based on what my distinguished panelists have already spoken. And I met Dr. Kapany for the first time about 20 years ago. And I was visiting the US. I was living in India, and I heard about there is this person, Dr. Kapany. He's the chairman of the Sikh Foundation. So I decided to give him a cold call. So I got his number, called him up, and that cold call in the year 2000 was the beginning of a lifelong relationship ever since. And here I am today, privileged and honored to share my memories and reflection of him, his life, and his legacy. And I've had the privilege of having a kind of a front row seat working with him for these years. But during this time, he hardly ever talked about the past. He was a man who was about the future. He was always talking about, oh, we must do this. This is what we have to do. And it wasn't like mostly you'll find older people, they dwell on their accolades of their past life. So that aspect of his life, I came to know when I was working with him on his book, the Memoirs, which he started a few years back. And slowly he recounted, recalled, dug out old photographs from his family albums and tried to piece the whole story together. So it's this working with the book that gave me the insight into his past life. And as other speakers have said, many people excel in their professions, but there are very few who excel in multiple areas. And Dr. Kapany was one of those great men of our lifetimes. He was an acclaimed scientist. He was a passionate entrepreneur, a dedicated academic. He was a pioneering art collector. He was a committed philanthropist and a creative artist himself. And in all these aspects, the common part is education. He was committed to it. His life demonstrated it. So while he decided to use education as the medium to share what he had learned and to pass it on to the younger generation, he established 2 chairs. The first was the Kundan Kaur Kapany Chair of Sikh Studies and Punjabi Language Studies at the University of California in Santa Barbara. This was the first ever chair in the Western Hemisphere on Sikh studies. And he decided to name it after his mother, to honor his mother for the education that he had received in his childhood. And then he also established another chair at the university campus at Santa Cruz, which was in optoelectronics, and a professorship in entrepreneurship, because these were the 2 professions that his scientific career focused on. But at the same time, he was also working with museums to display Sikh art. So here is this man who has a very scientific bent of mind, but he decides and he understands how the arts need to play a very important role going forward. Because I think he believed that art and museums are one of the best teaching resources. And he tried to bring these 2 together. And this is what I believe is his most important contribution to the Sikh Panth, to the community. And he did this in full partnership with his wife, Satinder Kaur. And through their vision and commitment, they collected hundreds of artworks over decades from different parts of the world. And they put together these as a collection, and they shared with us, validating to us and the world, that to the Sikh community itself and the world, that Sikhs have an artistic heritage which is as old as ourselves. And this includes not just beautiful portraits of the Sikh gurus or spectacular paintings of the Golden Temple, but also illustrated manuscripts. There are royal arts and treasures of the Maharajas. There's architecture and wall paintings. There's arms and armaments, coins, textiles, stamps, and a growing contemporary arts. And they both, Satinder and Dr. Kapany, shared this through, I think, about 11 international art exhibits in all the great cities of the world. And notably, this includes London, New York, Washington, Toronto, just to name a few. And I do wonder that if it is not for this magnificent collection, how else would we as a community be able to experience the totality and the entire range and the depth of our rich Sikh artistic heritage? And one of the things that stands out to me is that he chose to honor his wife, Satinder, by establishing the first ever, once again, it's the first ever. He's such a pioneer in his thinking and his achievements. The first ever permanent Sikh gallery at a museum in the United States. And it is here in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum, where in 2003, the Satinder Kaur Kapany Gallery of Sikh Arts was established, and it is a permanent one. But I'd like to go back in a little dateline as well. So he, 1948, he graduates from Agra University, sorry. India has, I mean, just place yourself in that time frame. India has just won freedom. It's a young nation, it's bubbling. He comes to the United Kingdom to pursue higher education in 1951. And then in 53, he earns his PhD. And 54, Satinder and Dr. Kapany are married, and they move to the United States in 55. So from when they come to Rochester in the beginning, and then they go to Chicago, and then he comes to the San Francisco Bay Area in 1961. And it is here where he becomes the first Indian, not only Sikh, but Indian, to take his company public. And this happens in 1967. And even then he's a young man of 40 years old. And what does he do with that? Here he has he's achieved worldly success. He has resources at his helm now. And what he does is establish the Sikh Foundation. If he has earned success, he doesn't want to keep it just for himself. He wants to share it further and inspire even the community. He's thinking of his own community, even at heady time that must have been at 40 years when you have just taken your company public and achieved that level of success. And so that is the time when the Sikh Foundation is established. We did celebrate the 50th anniversary of the foundation in 2019. Dr. Mohinder Singh was one of our distinguished speakers at the conference. We were very honored to have him. And this journey of 50 years of the foundation from its inception to here really saw it bringing the arts and education to the forefront. Is how do you preserve the heritage of this community? How do you use it to not only inspire the Sikhs, but also share this pride with the world at large? And that is where Dr. Kapany's excellence lies. And I sometimes do think that why did he choose the arts to achieve this big goal that he had in front of him? And I think about, okay, I go back to the 60s. I wasn't even born then, I would say. But here is this dashing, handsome, young Sikh man who's wearing a turban, who has a beard. And he's so proud of his identity. He is so confident in his profession. And so what is the first question that comes to the mind of Americans or the English when they see him? And I would imagine it would be like, who are you? Where are you from? What is the significance of your turban and beard? And how does he choose to answer this question? This is a query he's getting constantly every day of his life, whether it is unsaid or said. Those are the querying glances that he would get. And I think he chose to answer this query and the curiosity that he sparked in others by inviting Americans and the world to see the arts and heritage of the Sikh community, and through it, learn and appreciate the unique and the remarkable aspects of our faith, our culture, our heritage, and our religion. And Dr. Kapany expressed this in some very beautiful words during the gala celebrations, during the dinner that we had to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And I'd like to quote the two lines that he said, quote, "We should ensure that our friends of other faiths, races, and cultures understand who and what we are. We must present the beauty of our heritage, but without chauvinism. The wisdom, the philosophy, and the arts of the Sikh faith belong to the world," unquote. And this reasoning, and you get a glimpse of this from the book, The Man Who Bent Light, when he talks about how when he came to London, he was living in proximity to so many of these world-class museums. The Victoria and Albert Museum was close by, the Natural History Museum, the British Museum, and of course the Science Museum and the Imperial College. And probably that was his exposure to understanding world cultures, and he's learning this through these beautiful art and this nicely cultivated, curated exhibitions that are put up. And perhaps that is where somewhere it impacted him, and he continued. And then in the book also, we come to know about his childhood, when his grandmother would bring out the Janam Sakhi that had been commissioned by his family, his ancestors, when one of his ancestors was the head of the Patna Sahib Gurdwara, the Takat in Patna Sahib. And he commissioned one of the Janam Sakhis of Guru Nanak. And his grandmother would bring this volume out every afternoon. So when he's visiting her in the summers, those long, hot, dusty Indian summers, those afternoons would be spent listening to these stories that she would read from the Janam Sakhi. And the Janam Sakhi also had these beautiful illustrated paintings to go along with it. So BG, as he would call her, she would pass those paintings around to the women who are gathered to listen to those stories, and him to kind of like commune with the Guru's life, through those paintings. And his dad would come around and say, "Oh, Bibi, ye sach nahi hai." And, trying to, these are the fantastical stories. The endings are not, this is not the true story, but it is the moral of the story that I think we need to imbibe. But those beautiful images, those beautiful illustrations, they're the ones in those bold colors, somewhere they stayed with him, and it inspired him to build this beautiful collection along with his wife, Satyendra. So I think when you tie this up, it's how you try to understand how the arts played such an important part. And then there is also, we kind of like use Sikh art, the word, I've used it so many times while I've been talking for these past 10, 15 minutes. But this word did not exist about 30, 35 years ago. There was no word such as Sikh art. And it was in the journal that the Sikh Foundation used to publish. And Mr. Roopinder Singh mentioned it, the Sikh Sansar, which was from the Sikh Foundation, in which Dr. Kapany decided to dedicate one issue, a complete issue, to Sikh arts. And he invited Dr. Banerjee to come and to be the guest editor for this this particular edition. I'm sorry, it was Dr. R.P. Srivastava, and he was the guest editor. And in his editorial comments, Dr. Srivastava, he writes, and I like to quote this as well, just to give you an idea of where we are in 1975. I quote, For the first time in the history of journalism, a systematic attempt is being made to record the significant contributions made by Sikh artists, sculptors, architects, and artisans in the Punjab and elsewhere. No concerted effort was ever made by any author or historian, and so far no one has tried to write anything on this aspect of achievement of the Sikhs, which has glorified the pages of Sikh history and beautified the Punjab with architectural monuments, unquote. So this was the landscape in 1975. There were no museums doing any exhibits. There were no publications on Sikh art. There were no books. And the Sikh Sansar was the first to have the publication to devote this full issue on the subject. Now, from that time to today, we realize that there has been a mind shift to, in these 50 odd years, from this desolate, pervasive, but false narrative, which was surrounding the Sikh community of being a cultural desert, even as recent as 1975, and no one used the term Sikh art, to today when it has been transformed into one which is vibrant and alive. And for this, as a community, we are indebted to Dr. Kapany, because today Sikh art is celebrated in museums. There are dozens of publications. There's a growing number of Sikh artists, curators, historians, authors, dealers, and all these other related professions. So I'd like to conclude this by saying is like, why are the arts important? And what did I learn with my time with Dr. Kapany or through his work that he did? It is that the arts, they define a community. I believe that it is our artists who are the face and the voice of the community. And it is not just only painters or visual artists. It includes authors, poets, journalists, photographers, musicians, dancers, choreographers. All of whatever they're creating, whatever they're writing is what the world knows of us. It is through their work that the world knows. And Dr. Kapany recognized this. Even in his book, his memoirs, he commissioned a young artist, Sumit Singh Arora, who is from Chandigarh, to provide the sketches for the book. And he created these beautiful sketches, which are an important part of the book. So I think these are the reasons why visionaries like Dr. Kapany have given their unique, remarkable, and unparalleled seva to the community. And I just want to conclude with one thing is, I get this question sometimes, or people will make this remark that, arts is a hobby of the rich. Oh, he was a rich man, he could do whatever he wanted. But that's not the point. There are many, many rich people in this world. And that is not what makes them unique. What makes you unique is what you do with those resources. How do you use that time that you have? How do you use the resources, the skills, the network that you have, the position, the privileges? And this is what Dr. Kapany did with this remarkable use of his resources, his education, to bring us as a community to this wonderful place where today Sikh art is celebrated. And education through chairs and higher education is a part of the landscape here in the West and in America. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Dhami, for sharing your experiences with us, from your first-hand interactions with Dr. Kapany. And you said art is a hobby, or it's a hobby for the rich. Actually, I would say luck actually favors the brave, because the book does tell us that he landed in the US without any money on him. And he did have to go to various hotels and request them to let him stay put for a while till he could, repay the money to them. So it wasn't as if he worked hard for it. And indeed, what a man, what a life. It was really very enriching. Your talk was very enriching, bringing forth to us his contribution to the Sikh community, to the Sikh Panth, the making of the Sikh art vibrant and celebrated across the globe, as you said, a pioneer in that field as well. And through his concerted, focused, consistent efforts all along. Indeed, amazing. The more you talk about him, I think the more you want to learn about him. Maybe another day, but thank you so much for this very enriching talk. And sir, I think Professor Ravel Singh has lost the connection.
I think he had to leave for a meeting.
Okay, right, sir.
Did you check up? So I can perform his duty
All right, sir.
if you permit, Madhuri.
Thank you so much, sir.
Now, I think I have no suitable words to thank you all. I feel Kapany is with us, he is living. Whether he got his noble or not, he is in our hearts, and he's more than noble because he has done great works in US, in England, and also in India. So we'll always remember him for all that he has done in promoting Sikh studies. And with these words, I thank you, the panelists, Sir Roopinder Singh, Dr. Anand, Sonia Dhami, and our friend Dr. Madhuri Chawla, the moderator. We, as I mentioned earlier, arrange 2 functions every month, apart from major functions, in connection with Guru Nanak's birth, 550th Prakash Utsav. We arranged a series of lectures. First lecture was delivered by Professor B.N. Goswami and presided by Dr. Manmohan Singh himself. On that occasion, we also arranged an exhibition on Guru Nanak, life and legacy, which traveled to different parts of India and is now displayed in Anand Sahib Museum, and also the San Jose Gurdwara, Dr. Anand, for your information, that they have displayed in the San Jose Gurdwara.
Wonderful.
About Guru Tegh Bahadur's 4th birth centenary, our system was a little different than others. Most people have been talking about Guru Tegh Bahadur, great. But we also wanted to talk about the devout Sikhs who accompanied him, by Satidas, by Matidas, by Dyal Das. They knew the consequences of accompanying the Guru to Delhi. They were so brave. So we arranged lectures on these 3 people, and also on Bhai Jeta, as well as by Makhan Shah Labana, Lakhi Shah Banjara. We're getting monographs done. This exhibition is again going to San Jose Gurdwara and perhaps also to the Gurdwara in New York. This year, India is celebrating 75th year of its independence. Who, as Institute of Punjab Studies, have decided to have lectures highlighting the role of Punjab in freedom movement. The next lecture will be on 25th February on thinking about legacy of Gadar movement. Imagine, most of people go to America to make money. Now here were the Gadri Babas, Baba Jwala Singh and others who made a lot of money, but used all money to finance India's freedom struggle. And when I was in Berkeley, I was surprised at the vision of Baba Jwala Singh. He created Guru Gobind Singh Fellowship. He gave so much of money, and the condition was this fellowship should go to a bright student from Punjab. And he says, undivided Punjab. Sometimes Punjabi Muslims are getting it. That was the vision of those Gadarites who are celebrating them with a talk on Friday, 25th February at 11 a.m. again, because Mark Zagmer has agreed to preside and he is available only at that time. So please, if you find time, you join us. And I thank you again. Thank you, Sonia, for being so generous with your advice and time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.